Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, the cry of a wolf echoing through Rene wakes a number of attentive listeners. Within the city on the edge, in the shadow of the Machine King, how will a new presence and a new mystery shape the night to come? Find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 7. Attentive Listeners. Strena. The fifth day of winter, in the middle of the night. When the sound of the wolf pierced the evening, Strena was not the only member of the Haven to wake up. In fact, such was the intensity of that wolf's call that even Mama Maven woke up to check on the children. By itself, such an event might have come and gone without much note. There were wolves in the land east of the mountains, and on nights when the breeze carried towards the coast, there were rare nights when their song could be heard even in the old city. But scarcely 2 nights removed from the mass evacuation that had rocked the old city, and only hours after 3 men of shadows had informed Mama Maven that they would be watching the Haven for its safety, a wolf's howl was enough to send children into little throngs of worry and whispered suspicions. Strena found herself bouncing from one group to another, trying to calm Gooba as the Huna fretted and whined, hopping from one spot to another, ricocheting off of bedrolls and walls. Altogether, he was making a generally useless racket that reminded Strena why Hunas had such a hard time surviving out in the wild. Mama Maven was quick to reach the children, but only told them at first to quiet down and stay in their rooms before disappearing back down the stairs. Strena and several of the other sharp-sensed gifted kids immediately identified the disappearance as some sort of conferral with the Men of Shadows, which only added further fuel to the children's furiosity. But before Vider could start crying, which was pretty common, he was always prone to crying if left scared, hungry, or even bored for too long, Mama Maven returned to the children, hushing and comforting them with the skill of a woman who had done so 1,000 times before. There was nothing to be concerned about, she said. Simply a wolf, and maybe even one of the spirits who would be watchers for the wild. And then, between enough puzzled looks at the phrase and Tan's desire for a story, Maven quickly had them return to their beds, cuddled up under their blankets, while she folded her legs under her nightgown and began to tell them of the wolf spirits, the full moon's guard. They had not always been friends, Maven explained. The man of the forests and the wolf. For a long time, from the dawn of history, man and wolf had fought. They both hunted the stag and the boar and the rabbit. They both sought out fresh fields and forests and wanted lands to roam and call their own. They both wished to be kings of their lands, to sing to the moon unafraid of all others who ran under the night sky. But centuries ago, when the darkness of Apostolos swept across the earth, sea, sky, and flame, threatening to crush out all light and joy in the world, man and wolf had turned aside their differences. They had fought together for the wild and beautiful land that they both loved. For even though they had fought, like young brothers or little members of the Haven, at this point, Maven had tweaked the nose of Tan and Gorman, who always fought. Like those young brothers, the wolf and the man shared the same home, and they would do anything to protect it. There was a great battle, Maven explained, and many men were corrupted by the shadow of Apostolos, turning to darkness and greed. They burned the forests to fuel their armies of hate, and they tried to sweep across the world in a grim tide that would leave nothing left alive. Even Strena had curled a little tighter under her blanket then. Maven had a way of telling a story that made it seem like Apostolos and his shadow men were waiting just outside. But then, Maven explained, the wolf and the man of the forest had realized that they were not alone in their stand against Apostolos. Out in the snows, the bear-cat howled. From the sands, the serpent raised its tail. The song of the sea echoed out from waters deep and shallow, and the guardians of all nature joined together to push back against Apostolos and the darkness that threatened the place that they called home. Strena couldn't help but give a little shiver of excitement, and 2 or 3 of the Haven children let out little muted cheers. Mama Maven smiled and continued. Finally, she explained, The people of the forests and the sky joined with those who danced and sang along the ice and the water, and walked alongside those who strode boldly between the sand and in the lands of fire. And together, they beat back the darkness of Apostolos and scattered it until there was no trace of the darkness in all the free lands and the seas beyond it. But the free people knew that they had not beaten Apostolos back forever, and they knew they had to do something to prepare for when he would return. The man of the forest and the wolf had fought together, and in that time they had become something close to friends. But they knew it would be their destiny to quarrel again, especially if they let years pass. For, like brothers, they would always argue, always seek to be kings of their forests and their grasslands. It was then, Maven explained, that the great wolf pack mother Eru and the warrior Samon had gone to the spirit of the forest, the star stag, and asked that they might be bound forever, unbreakable, in some way that they would always watch for the coming of the darkness. And so the star stag blessed them and bound them together, and their child was the wolf spirit, Ersa, the first of the full moon's guard. Their children were given the gifts of long lives to run under the stars, with the speed and power of a wolf and the cunning of a man, as well as the ability to dance between both forms. United, they were protectors, a link between man and wolf, who would watch the night and be ready if the darkness of Apostolos ever returned to threaten the world.
And so, Mama Maven explained, when you hear the wolf cry out in the night, it is most likely one of our brothers or sisters, our old friends with whom we fight, singing as they run under the starry sky. But sometimes, on rare evenings, it may be the song of one of the full moon's guard, reminding everyone, human and wolf, that they still watch in the night, protecting us from the return of the darkness.
Strena was still awake, mind racing, listening out to the wind for the call of the wild long after Mama Maven had sent them to bed. She had always been excitable, and the story that Maven had just told felt different than the usual ones. Maven had lots of stories. Stories that told you how the golden glitterfly got its wings, or why the river bass had whiskers. But this one seemed different. It seemed like a story that had some ancient truth to it. Eventually, even Guba had faded off to sleep, though, and Strena's eager eyes grew heavy. But as she drifted into that place between waking and dreaming, that time of night where her gifts ran wild and blurred the lines between this world and the unseen one, she felt a pinpoint of gold fading from the woods into the city, like the tiniest flicker of a star. She was not the only one. When the wolf cried out, BC also snapped awake, heart pounding. She'd been having a terrible nightmare, but as that powerful howl echoed in the night, it banished the visions of terror and confusion, and replaced them with a pure animal awareness. But in time, the echo of the wolf faded, and the city returned to silence, where the darkness around her began to close in. Her nightmare had been about Krona, of course. In the nights since he had sent his first message, it was always a dream about him, no matter how many times she woke up in a cold sweat reaching for Scene, or brandishing her starsteel blades at nothing. Reaching over to her bedside, she rattled the bag she'd picked up earlier that day. After just a few nights, she'd gone through all of her hard drugs. Moondust came in little pills now, which were supposedly less likely to stop your heart entirely, but to BC they were just a little bit weaker than she was used to. Taking them was a far cry from the experience of throwing back, life-swallowing day-takers, like those she'd gotten used to back when she'd been using. Still, the little baby girl dose opiates accomplished what BC needed, shutting down her brain long enough to get some semblance of rest, while his words danced around her head, caressing her and promising to hold her tight. BC popped 2 this time, swirling them around with a healthy swallow of Tempest, an infused liquor used by storm chasers hunting at the edge of the end storm. There were voices somewhere down the hallways, excited chatter and gossip at the thunderous howl of the wolf and what it could possibly mean. But that was just enough to serve as a distraction for BC, until a double dose picked her up, spun her around, and whisked her off to sleep. And she'd hit the mark just about right with that dose. Not even May's hammering fist on the door was enough to drag her from slumber. And it was only when the wild woman entered the room and jolted the sleeping girl with a breath of the wild that BC finally drifted half awake. Even then, her eyes were wide, pinpointed pupils unable to see anything in the dark room. Still dazed, BC clumsily reached for her knives, but only succeeded in tangling herself more deeply in her covers, then fell out of bed. Beyond her, May had dutifully begun to light the candles and braziers in her room, before making her way over to one of the chairs and half sitting, half collapsing into it. With a look back at the girl on the floor, she took a deep breath and let it out.
I need you, B. I tried to do this all by myself, but I need you. Families are a few harsh words from having knives to each other's throats. The Machine King's appearance at Eclipse has them thinking that they have a traitor in their midst, maybe more than one. And the lesser families, well, they were already going to be under suspicion after the attack on Pitstaff, and for them things may have already gone too far to avoid blood.
May sighed, rubbing her eyes and leaning back in the chair. Then, she let out a dark chuckle.
And the most outlandish of all this, well, I'm not even sure if the Machine King is what I'm most afraid of. I need you, B.
BC had continued to struggle towards her feet, but still laid tangled in the covers, and she was only able to rise to her hands and knees. Looking down at the girl and then over to the bag of moondust pills, May's shoulders dropped.
I'm sorry, I should have known. Never mind, May said. I will leave you to your bliss. Good night, BC. I will do all that is in my power to...
BC growled, and with a titanic effort dragged herself free from the blankets, pointing to herself and snapping her fingers in May's direction until the wild woman got the message. Stepping over and placing her hands on BC's shoulder, May let the breath of the wild flow into BC once more. Hair and eyes suddenly ringed in green, BC fought to her hands and knees again, groaning something towards May and then shaking her head. A jerking, determined crawl brought BC to the edge of the garden, then out towards yet another of the potted plants. The sound of retching filled the air. Still on all fours, BC then fought her way back over to one of the boxes underneath the bed, where she dug around through bags and cases until she came across a jar, concealing a large bag of fine white blitz powder.
BC, I think this is hardly the time to be...
Failing 3 times to open the sealed jar, BC smashed it against the ground, lifting the bag from the wreckage with a satisfied grunt. Fumbling the drawstring open, she lifted the bag to her mouth and nose.
Fuck!
BC cried out as she furiously snorted back the powder, head and eyes rolling back.
What in the hell?
May gasped, stepping forward with her eyes alight, but BC waved a hand.
I'm good.
BC caught her breath and slumped back against the dresser. With a finger to her neck, she nodded, and then furiously snorted the powder again, gasping out with mouth and white nose covered in powder. Then she let loose a string of half-satisfied and half-pained curses. Letting the bag fall briefly to the side, BC looked up to May with bloodshot eyes.
I was listening. I just got, mouth on that much moon dust. Got rid of it. I am still not entirely sure that you can mouth, my child, I answered. I appreciate that you would go to these lengths, but it's not going to... Shut up, ma'am,
BC said.
You said you need me. You said you need me. Just give me a second.
Crawling from the dresser over to the bed, BC fought for control of her body, shaking her arms and legs and moving her head and hips to get a handle on how her various functions moved. She was starting to feel like a human again. The older woman watched as BC made her way back over to the wall by the door, still breathing deeply, and then hurled herself up, trying to bring herself to standing position. Fighting to her feet, BC slumped against the door, then stood again, taking another hit of blitz powder and shaking her head as she regained at least some composure. May stood across the room, arms crossed, looking uncertainly at BC, who pushed off the wall and now finally stood, facing May. BC's eyes were pulsing with green aftershocks, dilating and thinning at the conflicting substances, but they were as defiant as May had seen them in a long time. Gritting her teeth, BC shook her head, bouncing back and forth.
Okay. You act like this is the first time that I've been on a speedball. Apart from the fact that I feel like I could tear down the goddamn moon, which is great, May, you just need to make sure that my heart and lungs don't fail. You can do that, right? I can tell that your body is in quite the state, May said. But it does seem to be stable, if that is the right word. Maybe at equilibrium is a better. Oh, good. Yeah, great, good. Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna keep bumping this blitz every time I start to pass out again. So, you just check for me on the other side to make sure that my heart doesn't explode. Now tell me, I'm still listening, I'm still here. What can I do to help? BC, this can wait until tomorrow if it has to. You wouldn't have broken down my door and woken me up in the middle of the night if it could wait until tomorrow, ma'am.
BC took a hesitant step forward, then settled back against the wall and sighed.
I'm up now. Besides, this feels amazing, kind of. It's been a while.
May crossed her arms, unconvinced.
Look, May. I know I haven't really been on top of my game recently. And look, I'm not gonna promise you I'm perfect in the head right now. Fucking hell, I don't think I ever was. But you have to know that this is more important to me than anything else in the world right now, and I am here now. Can you trust me with that?
BC had never seen May look so tired. First, she offered BC the chance to sit. BC chose to remain leaning against the wall. And then May closed her eyes and collected her thoughts. Then, sitting up, May regained her posture at the edge of the chair, and looked like a touch of life had returned to her.
Well, I am not sure about what you heard. My experience with moondust is admittedly limited. But did you hear when I told you that the Machine King may not be the thing that I am most scared of? That reason is why I felt the need to wake you.
BC breathed deep and nodded. Blinking a few times, she leaned down and took another blitz bump. Eyes crossing, she caught her breath, considered a second, and then let the bag fall back down by her side.
I find that hard to believe, but that's not because I don't trust you. It's more like my brain can't even process an existence that would be more terrifying than the Machine King. Does that make sense? You are remarkably calm. Is that the effect of the speedball? Yeah, definitely. Part of me wants to fucking piss myself in fear, but I'm high as fuck, and we might want to address this now, while I'm still feeling like I can tear down the moon and face this head on. What's our next move? Do the families know about this other threat? I am not sure. We stand at the center of a great many tangled paths.
part of why I need your help is simply to untangle them all, but no. First, I have something I need to show you. We have a guest in my suite. A very special guest. Okay, BC said. Does this have to do with the other world-shattering evil that we're concerned about, or? It had been said as half a joke, some dark humor to lighten the mood, but May nodded gravely. Huh, fuck, BC said. Then, shaking her head, she nodded and clapped her hands together. Well, hey, lead the way, May, she said. That rhymed. No, don't look at me like that. A few of these goofs are gonna slip in. I'm high. I'm fucked up, but I'm here for you, May. Please let me help, regardless of the mental fuzz. Now let's go. Do you need any help getting to my suite? May said. Ugh. No, I think I can make it there, BC said. Railing another lump of blitz powder, she stood up fully, bouncing on her toes and then opening the door and stepping out. Checking her pulse again with shaking fingers, she noticed her heartbeat pounding at a rhythm not unlike standing at the central point in the pit courtyard, when all of the music collided with you at the same time. Certainly not a good sign, but she had bigger problems. Just checking, May. My heart isn't gonna explode just yet, right? Can you tell that? I'm counting on you. No, not yet. May put a hand on the younger girl. BC, for the last time, are you sure? May, a long time ago I promised I'd be there for you, BC said without turning back. For the past few days I sure as hell wasn't, but now I am. I was always better with something to fight. May stood against the doorway as BC walked forward. Fast and slightly clumsy, but no worse than thousands of drunks she had seen wander these halls before. With a nod, May closed the door behind them and followed after BC towards her suite. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.